Hello, Internet, and welcome to the Deep Fried Neurons podcast. It is a podcast about stories that I find interesting, and today I brought you a contemporary story. The story about a flight that went crashing down. Of course, this is not the famous Malaysian Airlines flight that was flying to Hong Kong, or so I think. This is not MH370. This is MH17. It's a different story. I'll cover that one as well because I'm interested in that story as well. But this one piques my interest because a lot of governments are involved. So without any further ado, I'm just gonna start it. I'm gonna cue the fucking. I started researching this story on a plane. Like, I'm not kidding. I was on a plane and I was reading about this, and I got on the plane. For some reason, I thought this was a good idea. And if you guys don't know, there's a bunch of bases that are in around where I live. So it's restricted airspace, and I was like, holy shit. I just got really paranoid. And I had a flight coming back as well. Anyway, um, I'm guessing most of you have understood from the title what is this about, but for those of you who don't know or have been living under a rock for the past 5-ish years, this one is about MH17, the flight that left from Amsterdam and never made it to Kuala Lumpur. On 14th July 2014, a flight of Malaysia Airlines, I think it's a Boeing 777. I'm not sure the make of the plane, but it's a passenger plane basically. And it has left the Amsterdam airport to go to Kuala Lumpur, and it's carrying passengers that are either going for a holiday or business or what their shit is, I don't know. And they take off and they make it well into Ukraine, and towards the eastern part of Ukraine. Suddenly, the plane goes off radar and stops responding to communications. A few hours later, a crash site is detected in the eastern part of Ukraine, where the plane was supposed to be, and it turns out the plane has crashed and there were no survivors. So, well, there was no reason for this to happen. The crew and the members, everything looked like it was in control, like it was in line. I'm sorry. And there was no way that something weird had happened over there. Of course, something weird had happened because a flight had gone down with zero survivors. All the passengers and crew were dead. This was a big oof. But nothing out of order was found in the plane until they started reconstructing it. When they started reconstructing it, they found that from the top left of the cockpit and the business class, there was a huge line of fragment entering into the plane, which means that it was shot down. Now, the Dutch Safety Board has released a video, and basically they say that on July 14 the flight took off. It did well, and it was supposed to be on this little airway or whatever, and they deviated from it a little because there was a thunderstorm right in its way. So they were heading their way, and somewhere in the Eastern Europe, where there is a conflict ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, like separatist militia to join Russia, and or separatist militia backed by Russia and the Ukrainian government are clashing in that area for control. And right in the middle, where they were supposed to be at Waypoint R&D, I'm not sure what it's called it's called Romeo something, but it's Waypoint R&D basically. And before they get there at 1:20, the flight suddenly drops off of radar and goes down. Now the Dutch Safety Board, after a lot of investigation, has determined that there was a buck surface missile system somewhere in the southeast part of Russia at the time, and it fired a missile which could travel around 3 times the speed of sound at this plane when it was detected in the airspace. And instantly the missile went up there. It blasted in front of the left round corner. It contained a core which had preformed iron fragments. which was supposed to be dispersed and, well, kill people because it's a missile, you remember? So I don't remember the name of the core, but apparently it's a popular core that is used for, you know, um, fragmentation. Like, it has um, proximity based detonation. So the moment it's close to its target, it doesn't need to hit the target itself. Even if it's close to the target, it can just blast there, and the core will release a shrapnel which will be traveling at immense speeds, and it will instantly kill anybody. And that's what it seems must have happened, because it's consistent with the evidence, and simulation shows that instantly killed the crew, or the flying crew of the member, and some of the business class. Wouldn't be surprising, because the bodies of the business class also show some of the similar markings, or what do you call it, some of the most similar scars. And shrapnel material found is the same that is found in the plane. Same with business class somewhere. After all of this, a lot of missile fragments which were found at the crash sites, six of which are determined like this. And I mean, I don't know how they're determined. Based on how the plane must have disintegrated after the missile hit it, this is how it has spread around. And consistently at those places, they have found parts of missile which are consistent with the type of missile they're thinking it is. Now, this is a very big oof. A passenger plane carrying all the passengers has crashed, and somebody is responsible. And the Dutch team is leading an international investigation which might actually take somebody to court. Now, of course, we all know who the culprit might be, because they're the ones having reservations about what kind of missile it is. They blame the Ukrainian government. Of course, if you haven't caught up, I'm talking about the Russians. The Russians have been backing and arming the separatist militia in Ukraine for a very long time. Now, there is a video where these men who work for who are the separatist militia, go at the crash site, and they are overheard saying, why were they flying over conflicted airspace or something like that. So there is a theory that a separatist militia backed by Russia was given these weapons to shoot down any plane that flies over there. Another theory, which is much more sinister, is that the Russian military could never trust a separatist militia which was on its own with such expensive and high level technology. So the Russian government themselves shot down the plane on their behalf. But the Russians say that the Ukrainians must have done that as well, because they saw something flying over that space and they thought it was a problematic aircraft, so they shot it down. Because the make of the missile is old, according to the Russians. According to the investigation, it's not. According to the investigation, they disagree quite a lot about the nature of the missile itself. They say that Ukraine fired the missile from the part of the Eastern European border that has been reported. Now, there is social media and dash cam recordings found on the way from the nearest military base where these bug surface systems might be kept by Russia, being brought to the point where it was fired from. There are some photos where even two missing missiles have been seen on a bug surface system going back towards this military base around the time of the crash. Looks pretty bad for Russia so far. But why would they do this? Now, of course, after yanking themselves out of the International Court of Justice, Russia also wants to frame Ukraine for doing this. I mean, given the fact that they're led by an ex-KGB mass villain, they should be better at something like this, right? But they're not. So do they want us to know that they shot down a civilian aircraft? Did they just want people to not use that airspace? I mean, it was understood to be reasonable by the crew of the plane to use that airspace, because a lot of flights had passed by that. I think about 140 flights have been reported to fly from that zone before. So Now, the Dutch want to take the Russians to the court. The investigators have named four major prime suspects in bringing this technology into the Eastern European part, and some of them even in firing. The four suspects, of which three are Russian, but Russia still denies the fact that any type of missile that they say was involved, and they're completely wrong about the people. And the reason they're doing that is because Russia doesn't have an extradition policy, so they're not going to give people to Russia. The Dutch have a way of taking this to court, but to which court? Because this is an international dispute. So they want to take it to the ICJ, but Russia has yanked themselves out of the ICJ around 2016. A shady move, but by a shady country. So I'm not surprised in any way. They're thinking of taking them to the European Court of Human Rights, where they might have to answer them. But this is Russia. This is all based on agreement. An investigation was carried because Ukraine was cooperative. Russians just wanted to keep an eye on what was happening, is what I am understanding from all of this. The Dutch have led the investigation and they've reached some conclusions, which honestly they want to pursue to prosecution. And that's where we stand, between about 300 to 400 dead civilians and cast and crew, stuck between the infighting between two governments, which are way more powerful than all of them, because they were somewhere which could have been risky. But that could have been anywhere. There's so many conflict-ridden zones all across the world, and that's what happened. Now, it's stuck in this gridlock of bureaucracy between two people, and denials from one government, and different stories from another government, and a pursuit of justice from one country, hopefully. And I just thought it was an interesting story because it's a prime example of how civilians like us get stuck between these big governments, and we see the worst end of it. I don't know. What are your thoughts about why they did it and who did it or how they did it? Of course, the Dutch evidence is a lot about how they did it, so I'm less inclined to believe you about anything that you say about how it happened. I'm just looking at what facts the Dutch have given us, and I want to know what you think would be the motive behind it, besides, framing each other. And that's it. Okay, that is all I have for you this week. If you like the resource of this podcast, please support us on Patreon. Follow me on social media. Subscribe to me on the YouTube channel. All of this will help. Any of this will help, really. And, stay tuned for more